He felt it before he understood it. The shift, the energy no longer reaching for him. The love that once waited quietly, now blooming boldly without permission. And what unsettles him most is that you didn't change. You returned to who you always were before you made yourself small. He didn't walk away, not really. His fear did, the part of him that didn't know how to receive your depth. The part that mistook your softness for need. The part that wasn't ready to be seen so fully by someone who held space instead of judgment. Now he watches from a distance as you rise without apology. Not loudly, not spitefully, but steadily, radiantly. And that quiet strength, it shakes him more than any angry word ever could. Because you're not punishing him, you're simply blooming. He never hated your truth. He just didn't know how to hold it. You showed up ready. He showed up wounded. And while he may have walked away in body, it was fear that led the exit. Fear of failing you. Fear of being enough. Fear of being truly known. He always thought you'd pause for him, that you'd hold the door open while he gathered the courage to choose you completely. But something shifted. You stopped standing in the hallway. And now that you've stepped into your light, the door behind you is quietly closed. He didn't expect your silence to be so loud. He thought the space would draw you back, but instead it gave you room to grow. And every day you rise without reaching for him. He feels the weight of what his fear pushed away. He sees your glow now and wonders if it was always there. It was. But he never looked closely enough. He was too busy bracing for abandonment to notice that you were the one choosing to stay. And now that you've stopped, he finally sees the miracle he never protected. You don't rise with bitterness. You rise with clarity, with boundaries built from the tears you once shed quietly. And though you no longer chase closure, your evolution speaks louder than any explanation he ever withheld. His friends don't know why he seems distracted. Why songs hit different now, why he scrolls without smiling. But his soul knows. It recognizes the absence of something sacred. Not because it's gone, but because it's no longer his to return to. He once believed he had time, but time is only kind when presence is honored. And now he's learning that a woman who heals doesn't rewind. She roots, she blooms, she becomes. And that becoming, it doesn't wait for fear to feel ready. You're not angry that he left, you're aware. Aware that he couldn't come with you because he hadn't come home to himself yet. And you learned the hard way, that no amount of love can make someone brave enough to receive it. Now he watches you bloom in real time. He sees the way your light touches others, the way your words hold weight, the way your presence makes peace. And the truth that terrifies him is simple. You became everything he prayed for after he walked away. You used to think you needed his validation to feel chosen. But now you know. You were never waiting to be picked. You were waiting to remember your own worth. And once you did, the game changed. He wonders if you still think of him, but you no longer live in those questions. You've moved beyond wondering and into becoming. And the love you carry now? It's too sacred to be wasted on what couldn't rise with you. He misses what you were, not realizing you were still in the process of becoming. And now that you've bloomed into the version of you he never stayed long enough to meet, he realizes he didn't walk away from a woman. He walked away from a future. You don't speak of him anymore. Not out of spite, but because he's no longer a chapter you reread. He's a footnote in the story of how you learn to let love go when it stops meeting you where you are. And even now, if he ever found the courage to return, he'd find a different woman standing where you used to be. One who no longer needs to be needed to feel enough. One who doesn't open the door unless someone's already knocking with both hands. You were not too much. You were just too true. And truth frightens people who build their identities on half versions of themselves. But your truth was never meant to be filtered. It was meant to be freeing. Let him watch. Let him feel. Not because you owe him pain, but because you gave him love. And now what he feels watching you bloom is not loss, but the weight of all the love he wasn't ready to hold. Because he didn't walk away. His fear did. And now, that same fear watches you rise, silently wishing it had been brave enough to stay. He never planned to live with the echo of you, but that's what remains now. An echo that travels with him into every new moment. Not loud enough to break him, but persistent enough to remind him that something sacred slipped through his hands. He can't explain it to anyone without sounding foolish. After all, he's the one who left, the one who shut down. But what no one knows is that every time he sees you becoming, something inside him mourns the version of himself that never grew beside you. You were his mirror, and mirrors can be terrifying. You saw the parts of him he didn't want to see, the potential, the fear, the inconsistency. But instead of running from him, you loved him there, and he mistook that love for pressure. He told himself he wasn't ready. But readiness isn't a moment, it's a choice. And now that you've chosen yourself, he's beginning to understand what it really means to be left behind by someone who was once all in. You never made him feel small. He just wasn't ready to feel seen. And being seen by someone who won't abandon you, even when you're broken, is more terrifying than being ignored. So he chose distance, not because you were too much, but because you were real. Now he watches your strength unfold in spaces he never entered. And though he scrolls past your posts like they're just content, his soul pauses on everyone, because he knows you're not performing, you're rising. He never gave you the words you needed, but life has given you the silence you deserved. And in that silence you found your voice, not the one that begs to be heard, but the one that commands peace without asking. Your softness wasn't weakness, it was sacred, a sanctuary he never knew how to rest in. And now, no matter how far he runs, he can still feel the warmth of what he left behind. Because real love leaves fingerprints on the soul. He doesn't dream about the beginning anymore. He dreams about the middle, where he pulled away, where you stayed soft, where you waited with open arms and tired eyes. And that's the part that wakes him up. Not what was lost, but what was unreciprocated. You used to believe that if you just held on tighter, he'd finally choose you fully. But now you understand, someone who is afraid of drowning will always mistake your depth for danger. And you, beloved, are made of deep waters. So you released him, gently, without slamming the door, without screaming. And somehow that peaceful exit pierced him deeper than any loud goodbye ever could. Because now, your absence holds more power than your presence ever begged for. He thought you'd return when he was ready, but he never considered that your healing might not include a comeback. He underestimated the woman who rises from her own heartbreak with gold in her hands. Now he feels the shift, the energetic severing, the way your name no longer lingers in his inbox, in his timeline, in his orbit, and it hits him. He's no longer in your prayers. He's just part of your testimony. He's watching you bloom in ways that make silence feel like punishment. But this isn't revenge. This is redemption. You're not getting even, you're getting whole. Every woman he meets now comes with comparison. Not because you were perfect, but because you were profound. And the deeper he goes into other connections, the more he realizes that what you offered wasn't surface. It was soul. Your loyalty wasn't naive. It was brave. And he didn't lose you because you stopped loving. He lost you because you started loving yourself more. And that shift changed everything. He didn't know how much space you took up until you stopped filling it. And now, the void hums with everything he never said, everything he didn't give, everything he assumed would wait forever. You still cross his mind when things get quiet, not as a regret, but as a revelation. He sees now that love doesn't beg, it becomes. And you became everything he was too afraid to hold. Even if he never says it, he knows. You were the calm inside his chaos, the prayer he avoided answering, the light he couldn't stare at for too long without burning. And now, that light is out of reach. Let him carry the weight. Not out of punishment, but out of truth. Because you didn't ask for too much. You just stopped settling for too little. And that's why his fear left, because it knew it couldn't stay where wholeness lives. You were never just a chapter in his story. You were the moment everything could have changed. But his fear got louder than his love. And now, all he can do is watch you bloom, from a place he can no longer enter. He scrolls through your photos and wonders when the shift happened. When your eyes stopped carrying the weight of waiting. When your smile became freedom instead of effort. And the truth is, it didn't happen overnight. It happened the day you chose peace over potential. You no longer flinch at his name. That alone terrifies him. Because for so long, he was used to you breaking every time he pulled away. But now he pulls, and nothing moves. Your roots have grown too deep for him to shake. In his heart, he still replays your last words, not because he didn't hear them then, but because he finally understands them now. Every sentence, every pause, every tearless silence was a final gift, one he was too proud to unwrap. He expected to feel relief. Instead, he feels rooms you used to fill, streets you used to walk beside him, moments you would have softened just by being there. He misses not just your presence, but the peace that followed you like a shadow. You didn't just love him, you covered him. You protected his soul while he resisted yours. And now in your absence, he finally sees that the safest place he ever had was the one he walked away from. There's a weight to what's unspoken, and though he may look composed, there's a storm inside every quiet glance, because healing has made you unreachable. And no matter how many times he replays the past, the ending stays the same. You rise. He asks the universe for signs, but the signs have been there all along, in your stillness, in your grace, in your distance. You no longer explain, you no longer extend, and that sacred silence, it says everything he wasn't brave enough to face. He notices how others look at you now, the respect, the admiration, the way your energy shifts a room, and it stings, because he knew you before the bloom, and now you've become a garden he can only admire from the fence he built himself. You once loved him loudly. Now you love yourself quietly. And somehow, that quiet has become louder than any "I love you" he ever received. Because real love, once redirected inward, becomes untouchable. He sees you thriving and tells himself it doesn't hurt. But late at night, when the world grows quiet and no one's around to impress, he feels it in waves. The memory of what you gave without asking for anything in return. You didn't outgrow him to prove anything. You outgrew the version of yourself that stayed too long in rooms where you weren't seen. And that evolution, it became your exhale, your freedom, your rebirth. Now he wonders who holds you when you're tired, who hears your unspoken thoughts. But more than that, he wonders how he ever became the one you used to talk to, the one who knew your heart, and still let it slip away. He didn't lose you because he stopped loving you. He lost you because he kept choosing fear over growth. And fear, no matter how familiar, will always push away what it doesn't know how to keep. There's a different kind of ache in watching someone live the life you could have built together. He may never say it, but he sees glimpses of that life every time he sees you shine. And that vision won't leave him. He used to think love was supposed to feel dramatic, chaotic, intense. But you taught him that real love feels like clarity, like peace, like home. And now the noise he once ran to only reminds him of what he gave up. He assumed you'd always come back, that the thread would never break. But healing doesn't walk in circles, it walks in truth. And once you stepped into yours, there was no turning around for validation you no longer needed. He doesn't recognize the woman you've become. And that's because she was buried under layers of waiting, hoping, and explaining. Now she's whole, she's present, she's finally loving from overflow, not lack. You don't need closure, you became it. And the final chapter was never a confrontation. It was the quiet decision to stop showing up where your value wasn't mirrored. He still talks about you in what ifs. What if timing had been better? What if he had stayed? But what if is the language of those who waited too long to act. And now, even his dreams feel too late. You forgave him before he even asked. Not for him, but for yourself. Because healing isn't about getting answers. It's about releasing the question. And your heart no longer asks why. Now your joy is your boundary. Your peace is your protection. And your growth? It's no longer negotiable. Let him wonder. Let him remember. Because the woman he lost was the prayer he didn't believe he was worthy to receive. He didn't walk away. His fear did. And now he lives with the echoes of the bloom that grew in his absence. A bloom he can admire but never hold. Thank you for receiving this message. You didn't find it by accident. Your soul was ready to hear it. Heaven aligned. Every word to remind you that your story is not behind you. It's still being written in grace, strength, and divine timing. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, confirm it in the comments by writing, "I can do all things through him who strengthens me." Let that be your declaration of alignment with purpose, peace, and power. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another message meant just for you. Your next confirmation might arrive in the very next video, and I want you to be ready when it does. Until then, walk in truth, rise in silence, and remember the angels are still speaking. See you in the next message.